The needle slipped through Clara Emerson's finger for the third time that morning, leaving a bright dot of blood on the white silk wedding dress that belonged to the mayor's daughter, and she knew this was the day everything would finally break apart. She pressed her thumb against the wound and glanced around the cramped room that served as her bedroom, workshop, kitchen, an entire world. The space measured barely 10 feet by 12, with a single window that overlooked the dusty main street of Kingston, Nevada. It was October 1876, and the autumn sun filtered through glass so dirty it turned the light brown. Fabric scraps covered every surface. Half-finished garments hung from nails driven into the walls. Her narrow bed was shoved against one corner, and she had to move it each morning just to access her sewing table. Clara was 22 years old, and she had been living in this room above the general store for 4 years. The rent took most of what she earned, and what remained barely covered food. She had arrived in Kingston as an 18-year-old girl fleeing an arranged marriage back in Boston, with nothing but her sewing skills and a desperate need for independence. She had thought freedom would feel larger than this. The bloodstain on the silk made her stomach turn. She dabbed at it carefully with a damp cloth, her hands trembling. Mrs. Hartford would be furious. The wedding was in 3 days, and this dress represented 2 months of painstaking work. 2 months of squinting by candlelight until her eyes burned. 2 months of hunching over her table until her spine felt like it might snap. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly draped a piece of muslin over the stained dress and called out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal Finn Fletcher, and Clara's small room seemed to shrink even further. He had to duck his head to enter, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. He was a mountain man who came down to Kingston twice a year to trade furs and stock up on supplies, and every time he appeared, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a powerful build that spoke of years hauling traps through deep snow and wrestling with nature itself. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his rugged appearance. His arms were thick with muscle that strained against his buckskin shirt. "Miss Emerson," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "I hope I am not disturbing you." Clara stood quickly, nearly knocking over her chair. "Mr. Fletcher." "No, not at all." "What can I do for you?" He held up a heavy coat, wolf fur lining visible at the collar. "Tore the sleeve. Wondered if you might mend it." She took the coat from him, acutely aware of how his fingers brushed hers in the exchange. His hands were enormous, scarred and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Of course. I can have it ready by tomorrow afternoon." "Much obliged." He did not move to leave. Instead, his gray eyes swept over the cramped space, taking in the fabric chaos, the narrow bed, the single cooking pot on the tiny stove. His jaw tightened. "You live here." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, it is small, but it suits my needs." "Suits your needs," he repeated, and something in his tone made it clear he did not believe her. His gaze landed on the window where a crack in the glass had been stuffed with old newspaper. "Winter is coming. This room will not keep the cold out." "I manage," she said, lifting her chin. She had learned early that pity was dangerous. It made people think they could control you, could make decisions for you because they knew better. Finn looked at her for a long moment, and Clara had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her careful defenses. Most people in Kingston treated her as invisible, a useful pair of hands to fix their clothes and nothing more. But Finn Fletcher looked at her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Where do you cook?" he asked. "I have a stove." She gestured to the corner, where a cast iron contraption barely larger than a hat box sat on a wooden crate. "Where do you eat?" At my sewing table. Mr. Fletcher, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you. And where do you sit when you want to rest? When you want to read a book or just think? Clara opened her mouth and then closed it. The truth was she could not remember the last time she had done either of those things. Every moment was spent working or sleeping, and even sleep felt like stolen time. Finn shook his head slowly. This is not living. This is surviving. Surviving is all I need to do, Clara said, her voice sharper than she intended. I take care of myself. I do not rely on anyone, and I do not need space to breathe. He finished quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned away, busying herself with folding his coat. The mending will cost 50 cents. Will that be acceptable? She heard him move, his footsteps heavy on the creaking floor. For a moment she thought he might argue further, but instead he simply said, "That will be fine." "Thank you, Miss Emerson." After he left, Clara sat down at her sewing table and put her head in her hands. Space to breathe. What a luxury. What an impossible, ridiculous luxury. She forced herself to return to the mayor's daughter's dress, carefully working on the bloodstain until it faded to nearly nothing. Then she spent the next 6 hours reinforcing seams and adding the final touches of lace. By the time the sun set, her eyes were burning and her fingers were cramping, but the dress was nearly finished. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She could hear everything through the thin walls. The couple next door arguing, the drunk man stumbling up the stairs, the rats scratching in the walls. She pulled her threadbare blanket up to her chin and tried to imagine what it would feel like to have space to breathe. The next morning, she delivered Finn Fletcher's mended coat to the boarding house where he was staying. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, a plump woman with suspicious eyes, directed her to the second floor. Clara knocked on the door, and Finn opened it wearing only his trousers and an undershirt. The fabric clung to his chest, revealing the powerful muscles underneath. Clara quickly averted her eyes, feeling her face heat. "Miss Emerson," he said, sounding pleased, "you work fast. I said it would be ready today." She held out the coat, careful not to look directly at him. "The tier has been reinforced. It should hold now." He took the coat and examined her work, running his fingers over the neat stitches. "Fine work. Very fine." He disappeared into the room for a moment and returned with several coins. "Here, an extra for the quality." Clara counted the coins and found he had given her a full $1. "Mr. Fletcher, this is too much." "It is exactly right," he said firmly. Then he leaned against the door frame, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Tell me something, Miss Emerson. Why did you come to Kingston?" The personal question caught her off guard. "That is my own business." "Fair enough." He crossed his arms over his chest, and Clara tried very hard not to notice how the movement made his biceps flex. "Let me ask you this instead. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in that little room?" "What I want is irrelevant," Clara said. "I have work to do. Good day, Mr. Fletcher." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I am heading back up to my cabin in 2 days. It is about 20 miles north of here, up in the mountains. I have been thinking about something, and I have a proposition for you." Clara turned back slowly. "What kind of proposition?" "Come work for me. I need someone to mend clothes, make new garments for winter. The work is hard up there, and things wear out fast. I would pay you better than what you make in town, and you would have your own room. A real room with a door that closes and a window that looks out on the trees instead of a dusty street." Clara's heart began to pound. "Mr. Fletcher, I cannot just leave town and move to a cabin alone with a man. My reputation, I understand," he said quickly. "I am not suggesting anything improper. The cabin is large. You would have complete privacy. And if you are worried about what people will think, we could arrange for someone to come check on you regularly. Maybe Mrs. Patterson's daughter makes the trip once a week. Why would you do this? Clara asked suspiciously. You do not even know me. Finn was quiet for a moment, his expression serious. Yesterday, when I saw you in that room, I saw something I recognize. I used to live in a place like that back in St. Louis. I was working in a factory, living in a room even smaller than yours. Every day I felt like the walls were closing in, like I could not get enough air. Then one day I just left, headed west, ended up in these mountains. Best decision I ever made. So you feel sorry for me, Clara said flatly. No. His voice was firm. I respect what you have built for yourself. You came here alone, made a life with your own skills. That takes courage. But I also know what it is like to need more than just survival. Sometimes you need space to breathe. There it was again, that phrase. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had been carefully maintaining for 4 years. I need to think about it, she managed. Of course. Finn reached into his room and pulled out a piece of paper. I will be at the boarding house until Friday morning. If you decide you are interested, meet me here at dawn. If not, I wish you all the best, Miss Emerson. Clara took the paper, though she had no idea why. She already knew where the boarding house was. As she walked back to her tiny room, her mind was spinning. The offer was insane. She could not possibly accept. Moving to a mountain cabin with a man she barely knew, it was dangerous, reckless, completely inappropriate. But when she climbed the stairs to her room and opened the door to find the same cramped space waiting for her, the same piles of fabric and the same narrow bed, she felt something very much like despair. She spent the rest of the day finishing the mayor's daughter's dress. When she delivered it that evening, Mrs. Hartford inspected every seam with narrowed eyes. "Is that a stain?" she demanded, pointing to the spot where Clara's blood had fallen. "No, madam, just a shadow from the light." Mrs. Hartford held the dress up to the window, turning it this way and that. Finally, she gave a grudging nod. "It will do, though I expected better for the price I am paying." She handed Clara an envelope with the payment, and Clara counted it carefully. It was $10 short of what they had agreed upon. "Mrs. Hartford, this is not the correct amount. I am deducting for the delay. You said it would be ready yesterday." "No, madam. I said it would be ready 3 days before the wedding. The wedding is not until Saturday." "Do not argue with me, girl. You should be grateful I am paying you at all, considering the substandard work." Clara looked down at the dress, at the hundreds of tiny stitches she had sewn by candlelight, at the delicate lace she had applied with aching fingers. Substandard. She opened her mouth to argue further, then closed it. Mrs. Hartford had all the power here. If Clara made a fuss, the woman would tell everyone in town that she was difficult, and Clara would lose what little business she had. "Thank you, madam," Clara said quietly, and left. She walked back through the darkening streets of Kingston, past the saloon where drunken laughter spilled out into the night, past the general store where Mr. Hawkins was closing up for the evening. When she reached her room, she sat down on her bed and counted her money. With what Mrs. Hartford had paid her, minus the rent she owed, she had $3.60. That was all she had in the world. Clara did not cry. She had learned years ago that crying solved nothing. Instead, she lay down on her bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Mrs. Hartford's contempt. She thought about this room, these 4 walls that had been her entire universe for 4 years. She thought about Finn Fletcher's offer of space to breathe. At some point, she fell asleep. She dreamed of mountains and clear air and rooms with doors that closed. When she woke before dawn, Clara knew what she was going to do. It was reckless and possibly stupid, but she could not spend another 4 years in this room. She could not spend another 4 years bowing and scraping to people who treated her like she was less than nothing. She packed quickly, rolling her few dresses and her sewing supplies into a canvas bag. She left the rent money on the table with a note for Mr. Hawkins. Then she walked through the silent streets of Kingston toward the boarding house. Finn was already outside, loading supplies onto a sturdy horse. When he saw her approaching, his face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features. "Miss Emerson," he said, "I am glad." "I have conditions," Clara said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. "I want my own room with a lock on the door. I want to be paid weekly. And if I decide at any point that this arrangement is not working, you will bring me back to town immediately." "Agreed." Finn held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Clara looked at his outstretched hand, so large it could probably engulf both of hers. She thought about trust, about risk, about the leap she was about to take. Then she reached out and shook his hand. "We have a deal, Mr. Fletcher." "Finn," he said, "if we are going to be living under the same roof, you should call me Finn." "All right, Finn. You can call me Clara." He smiled again, and Clara noticed for the first time that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow. "It is a pleasure to officially meet you, Clara." They rode out of Kingston as the sun was rising, turning the desert landscape pink and gold. Clara rode behind Finn on his horse, her bag secured to the saddle. She had never been on a horse before, and she gripped the edge of the saddle nervously. "Relax," Finn said over his shoulder. "Daisy here is gentle as a lamb. She would not throw you even if you tried to make her." As if to prove his point, the horse plodded along at a steady, even pace. Clara gradually loosened her grip and allowed herself to look around. Kingston fell away behind them, and before long they were surrounded by scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still capped with snow. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" Clara asked. "About 8 years now." "I was 20 when I left St. Louis. My father wanted me to take over his business making barrels. Good, steady work, but I felt like I was suffocating. So I left one night with nothing but a bedroll and my savings, headed west and kept going until I found a place that felt right." "Do you ever regret it?" Finn was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I miss my family. I have 2 younger sisters and I wonder what they are like now. But do I regret leaving? No, not for a second. Up here I can breathe, I can think. I can be who I actually am instead of who everyone expects me to be." Clara understood that feeling all too well. Back in Boston, she had been expected to marry the son of her father's business partner, a man twice her age with wandering hands and a cruel mouth. Her parents had insisted it was a good match. When she had refused, her father had told her she was an ungrateful, disobedient daughter. So she had taken the small amount of money her mother had secretly given her and run. "What about you?" Finn asked. "What brought you west?" "I needed to leave," Clara said simply. "And Kingston was as far as my money would take me." Finn did not push for more details, and Clara was grateful. Some stories were not ready to be told yet. They rode for several hours, the landscape gradually changing as they climbed higher. The scrub brush gave way to pine trees, and the air grew cooler and fresher. Clara found herself breathing more deeply, filling her lungs with air that did not taste like dust and sweat. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat. Finn pulled out bread and cheese and dried meat, and they sat on a flat rock overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Miles and miles of wilderness stretched out before them, untouched and wild. "It is beautiful," Clara said softly. "Wait until you see the cabin," Finn said. "It sits on the edge of a meadow with a stream running right past. In the spring, the whole meadow fills with wildflowers. I have never seen anything like it." "How did you build it?" Slowly. He grinned. "Took me 2 years to get it the way I wanted. Started with just 1 room, then added on as I learned more about carpentry. It is not fancy, but it is solid. Keeps the weather out. They continued riding, and as the afternoon wore on, Clara felt her nervousness returning. What had she done? She was riding into the mountains with a man she barely knew, leaving behind the only life she had built for herself. If this turned out to be a mistake, if Finn turned out to be different from what he seemed, she would have no one to turn to for help. As if sensing her anxiety, Finn said, "I know you are taking a risk trusting me. I want you to know I take that seriously. I am a man of my word, Clara. What I promised you, I will deliver." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. The sun was low in the sky when they finally emerged from the trees into a meadow. Clara gasped. The cabin stood at the far end, built from honey-colored logs that glowed in the late afternoon light. It was larger than she had expected, with a covered porch running along the front and glass windows that reflected the sky. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. Behind the cabin, mountains rose up in shades of blue and purple. "Welcome home," Finn said. He dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands strong and steady on her waist. Her legs were shaky from the long ride and she stumbled slightly. Finn caught her easily, holding her until she found her balance. "Sorry," Clara murmured. "I am not used to riding. You did well for your first time." He grabbed her bag and led her toward the cabin. "Come on, let me show you around." The inside of the cabin was even more impressive than the outside. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy wooden table stood in the center, surrounded by handmade chairs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and supplies. Everything was neat and well organized, which surprised Clara. She had expected a bachelor's chaos. "Kitchen is over there," Finn said, gesturing to a corner where a cast-iron stove sat alongside a dry sink and more shelves. "I built a cold cellar under the floor for storing food. And this," he opened a door, "this would be your room." Clara stepped into the room and felt tears prick her eyes. It was not large, but compared to what she had been living in, it felt enormous. A real bed stood against one wall, covered with a colorful quilt. A dresser sat opposite, and a small table with a chair was positioned under the window. The window itself looked out over the meadow, and the view made Clara's throat tighten. "There is a lock on the door, as you requested," Finn said, pointing to the new-looking iron lock. "I am the only other person with a key, and I will give it to you now." He pressed a key into her hand. "This is your space, Clara, your private space. I will never enter without your permission." Clara turned to look at him, this huge mountain man who had somehow seen her desperation and offered her a way out. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "Really?" Finn met her gaze steadily. "Because I know what it is like to be trapped. And because when I saw you in that little room, something in my chest just ached. You deserve better than that. Everyone deserves space to breathe." Before Clara could respond, Finn stepped back. "I will let you get settled. My room is on the other side of the cabin. When you are ready, come out and I will make us some supper." After he left, closing the door behind him, Clara sat down on the bed. It was soft, comfortable. She lay back and spread her arms wide, and for the first time in 4 years, she did not hit a wall on either side. She stared up at the ceiling, which was made of smooth wooden beams, and let the tears finally come. They were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone who had been holding their breath for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to exhale. Later, after Clara had unpacked her few belongings and washed her face in the basin Finn had left for her, she emerged from her room. Finn was at the stove, stirring something that smelled incredible. "I hope you like venison stew," he said. "I make a big pot every few days, easier than cooking something new every night." "It smells wonderful," Clara said honestly. In her little room, She had subsisted mainly on bread and cheese and whatever vegetables she could afford. A hot meal felt like a luxury. They ate at the big table, and Clara was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Finn. He asked about her sewing, genuinely interested in the techniques she used and the challenges of working with different fabrics. She found herself telling him about the mayor's daughter's dress, about Mrs. Hartford's accusations of substandard work. Finn's jaw tightened. "You should have been paid what you were promised." "That is how it goes sometimes," Clara said with a shrug. "I did not have the power to argue." "Well, you will not have that problem here. I will pay you fairly and on time." In fact, he stood and went to a shelf, pulling down a small wooden box. "Here is your first week's wages in advance." He counted out $5 and placed them in front of Clara. Her eyes widened. "This is too much. I have not even done any work yet." "You will," Finn said. "Trust me, I have a whole pile of things that need mending. And I need new shirts for winter and new trousers. Plus, I was hoping you could make some curtains for the windows. The morning sun comes in fierce sometimes." Clara looked at the money, more than she usually made in a month in Kingston. "I do not understand. You could have hired someone in town to come up and do this work for much less." Finn sat back down, his expression serious. "I am not just hiring you for the sewing, Clara. I am offering you a chance to build a different life. You were suffocating in that room, I could see it. And maybe I am being selfish, but I wanted to be the one to help you breathe again." There was something in his voice, something warm and genuine that made Clara's heart skip. She had spent so long being invisible, being dismissed, that having someone truly see her felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." That night, Clara lay in her new bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. The wind rustled through the pine trees. The stream babbled in the distance. It was so different from the sounds of Kingston, the drunken shouts and creaking stairs and scratching rats. Here, everything felt clean and alive. She thought about Finn in his room on the other side of the cabin, and she felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. For the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt truly safe. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Finn already up, tending the fire. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I hope I did not wake you, not at all. What time is it?" "Just past dawn. I am usually up early. The mountain has a way of making you appreciate the mornings." He poured her a cup of coffee from a battered tin pot. "I thought today I could show you around properly, help you get your bearings. Then tomorrow I need to head out to check my trap lines, and you can start on the sewing if you like." They spent the morning exploring. Finn showed her the cold cellar, packed with preserved vegetables and smoked meat. He showed her the shed where he kept his tools and his woodworking supplies. He showed her the stream, crystal clear and so cold it made her gasp when she dipped her fingers in. "The water comes straight down from the snowmelt higher up," Finn explained. "Best water you will ever taste." He showed her the garden plot, now dormant for the winter but clearly well tended. He showed her the small barn where Daisy lived alongside 2 goats. "The goats give milk," Finn said, "and they are good company, friendlier than you would expect." As they walked, Clara found herself watching Finn more than the scenery. He moved through his domain with easy confidence, his powerful body handling physical tasks without apparent effort. When he needed to move a heavy log that had fallen across the path, he simply bent down and lifted it, the muscles in his arms and back flexing beneath his shirt. Clara felt her face heat and quickly looked away. "Over there," Finn said, pointing to the north, "is where my nearest neighbor lives, about 5 miles away. Good man named Henry. He has a wife and 3 kids. I sometimes trade with them, help with bigger projects." So I am not completely cut off from civilization, Clara said. Not completely, but far enough that you can pretend to be. Finn grinned at her, and Clara found herself smiling back. That afternoon, Finn showed Clara the pile of clothes that needed mending. It was substantial. Torn trousers, shirts with missing buttons, a coat with a ripped seam. Clara set up her sewing supplies on the big table and got to work. As she sewed, Finn worked on carving something at the other end of the table. They did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable. Occasionally, Finn would get up to add wood to the fire or put the kettle on for tea. And each time he passed behind Clara's chair, she found herself acutely aware of his presence. Over the next several days, they fell into a routine. Finn would leave in the early mornings to check his traps, and Clara would spend the day sewing. She worked steadily through his pile of mending, then started on a new shirt. When Finn returned in the late afternoon, often carrying fresh game, he would cook dinner while Clara set the table and told him about her progress. "You are fast," Finn observed one evening as Clara showed him the finished shirt. "This would have taken someone else twice as long." "I have been sewing since I was 6 years old," Clara said. "My mother taught me. She was a seamstress too, one of the best in Boston. People came from all over for her work." "Does she know where you are?" Clara's smile faded. "No, I have not spoken to my family since I left. I sent one letter, telling them I was safe, but I did not include a return address. I doubt they would want to hear from me anyway." Finn reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was brief, but it made Clara's pulse race. "Their loss," he said simply. As the weeks passed, Clara felt herself changing. The permanent tension in her shoulders began to ease. She slept better. She laughed more. The work was still hard, but it felt different when she was working in a bright, spacious cabin instead of a cramped room that smelled like mildew. And then there was Finn. Clara found herself watching for his return each afternoon, found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch. She loved the way he moved, powerful and sure. She loved the sound of his laugh, deep and genuine. She loved the way he treated her with respect, never talking down to her or dismissing her opinions. One evening, about a month after Clara had arrived, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Finn was working on a piece of leather, making a new harness for Daisy, and Clara was embroidering flowers onto a pillowcase. Snow had started falling that afternoon, and outside the windows, everything was white and soft. "I have been thinking," Finn said suddenly. "Winter is really setting in now, and it is going to get cold. Really cold. I was wondering if you might want to move your sewing table closer to the fireplace. The heat does not reach your room as well as I would like." Clara looked up from her embroidery. "That is thoughtful, thank you. It has been getting chilly in there at night. I could also put more blankets on your bed, and I have been meaning to check the chinking on your window, make sure there are no gaps for drafts." "Finn," Clara said gently, "why are you so worried about my comfort?" He looked at her, and in the firelight his gray eyes seemed to glow. "Because you matter to me," he said simply. "Your happiness matters to me. I want you to be comfortable here. I want you to want to stay." Clara's breath caught. "I do want to stay. Good." Finn smiled, but there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I was worried that maybe you were just biding your time until spring, when you could go back to town." "No," Clara said. "Kingston was never home. This feels more like home than anywhere I have been since Boston." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Clara felt something shift between them. The air felt charged, full of unspoken feelings. Finn cleared his throat and looked back down at his leather work. "I am glad you are here, Clara. Really glad." "I am glad I am here too," Clara said softly. That night, lying in her bed, Clara admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Finn Fletcher. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She had never felt this way about anyone before. The man her father had wanted her to marry had inspired nothing but revulsion. But Finn made her feel safe and excited and seen all at once. The next morning brought heavy snow. Finn came into the main room and announced that he would not be checking the traps today. "Too dangerous in this weather," he said. "Easy to lose your bearings. We will stay close to the cabin." Clara found she did not mind being snowed in. They spent the day working side by side, and when the cabin grew dark in the late afternoon, Finn lit lamps and candles until the space glowed with warm light. "Tell me more about Boston," Finn said as they prepared dinner together. "What was it like growing up there?" Clara chopped vegetables while Finn prepared a rabbit he had caught earlier in the week. "Crowded," she said, "and formal. Everything had rules. Rules about what to wear, how to speak, who you could associate with. My family was middle class, which meant we were constantly trying to appear wealthier than we were. My mother took in sewing secretly, because God forbid anyone knew we needed the extra money. Sounds suffocating. It was. And then my father arranged the marriage, and I realized my whole life would be more of the same. A different set of walls, but still walls." Clara scraped the vegetables into the pot. "So I ran. I took my mother's sewing kit and the money she gave me, and I bought a ticket on the first train heading west." "That took courage," Finn said, "or foolishness. I am still not sure which." "Courage," Finn said firmly. "Staying would have been the foolish choice." They ate their stew while the snow continued to fall outside. After dinner, Finn pulled out a worn deck of cards. "You know how to play poker," Clara laughed. "No, that was definitely not one of the skills taught to proper Boston ladies." "Well then, I am going to teach you." Finn dealt the cards with practiced ease. "Fair warning, I am very good." He was indeed good, but Clara proved to be a quick learner. Soon she was winning almost as many hands as she lost. They played for hours, laughing and teasing each other until Clara could barely keep her eyes open. "I should go to bed," she said reluctantly. Finn gathered up the cards. "Thank you for today. I have not enjoyed myself this much in a long time." "Neither have I," Clara admitted. She started toward her room, then turned back. Finn was banking the fire, his strong profile outlined in the dying light. Clara felt a rush of affection so strong it almost made her dizzy. "Finn," she said. He looked up. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for seeing me when no one else did, for giving me this chance, for making me feel like I matter." Finn stood, his expression intense. He crossed the room until he was standing right in front of her. He was so tall that Clara had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You do matter," he said, his voice low and rough. "You matter more than you know." They stood there for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, and Clara thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to kiss her. But instead, Finn stepped back and gave her a gentle smile. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Finn." Clara lay awake for a long time that night, her heart pounding. She knew now that Finn felt something for her too. She had seen it in his eyes, heard it in his voice. But he was being respectful, giving her space, not pushing. After all the times men had grabbed and pushed and demanded, Finn's restraint was a gift. But Clara was beginning to think she did not want restraint. She wanted to know what it would feel like to be held by those strong arms, to be kissed by that gentle mouth. She wanted to explore these new feelings that were blooming inside her chest like wildflowers in his mountain meadow. The snow continued for 3 days straight. By the 3rd day, the drifts were halfway up the cabin walls, and the whole world seemed to have disappeared under a blanket of white. Finn and Clara spent the time in close quarters, and the proximity made Clara's feelings grow even stronger. She began to notice small things. The way Finn's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The care he took with his work, whether he was cooking or carving or mending the harness, the gentleness in his huge hands when he handled delicate things, the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. One afternoon, Clara was standing on a chair trying to reach a bolt of fabric on a high shelf. Finn had gone to check on the animals in the barn, and she had decided to use the time to organize her supplies. But the chair wobbled on the uneven floor, and suddenly Clara was falling. She never hit the ground. Finn caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist and pulling her against his chest. He must have come back inside without her hearing. "Careful," he said, his breath warm against her ear. Clara turned in his arms and found herself pressed against him, her hands instinctively going to his shoulders for balance. She could feel the solid wall of his chest, the strength in his arms, the rapid beating of his heart that matched her own. "Thank you," she whispered. Finn's hands were still on her waist, his gray eyes searching her face. "Clara," he said, and there was a question in his voice. Instead of answering with words, Clara did something she had never done before. She stood on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Finn went completely still. Then, with a sound that was almost a groan, he kissed her back. His lips were soft despite his rugged appearance, and his kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Clara pressed closer, her fingers tangling in his long hair, and the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "I did not want to take advantage. You came here to work, to have your own space." "I did not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." Clara's heart swelled. "Finn Fletcher, you are the most honorable man I have ever met, but I want you to know that I have been wanting you to kiss me for weeks too." Finn smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. "Well then, I am glad we are on the same page." He kissed her again, softly this time, reverently. "I am falling in love with you, Clara Emerson. I think I have been falling since the moment I saw you in that cramped little room, looking like you were about to break but refusing to bend." "I am falling in love with you too," Clara confessed. "You make me feel things I did not know I could feel, safe and excited and free all at once." They spent the rest of the afternoon wrapped in each other's arms on the sofa in front of the fire, talking and kissing and making plans. Finn told Clara about his dreams for the cabin, how he wanted to add another room and maybe build a proper workshop. Clara told him about her dream of one day having enough money to buy a sewing machine, how it would speed up her work and allow her to take on bigger projects. "We could do that," Finn said. "We could order one and have it shipped out here. I have been saving money from my furs. I was not sure what I was saving for, but now I know." "Finn, those are your savings. I cannot, our savings," he corrected gently. "If you will have me, Clara, I want us to build a life together, a real partnership. What is mine is yours." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," Finn said with a smile. "When I ask you to marry me, I am going to do it properly. But I am asking if you can see a future with me, here in this cabin building a life together." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, I can see that. I want that." They kissed again, and this time there was a promise in it. A promise of forever, of partnership, of love that would grow deeper with each passing season. When the snow finally stopped and the sun came out, the world was transformed. Everything was covered in a pristine blanket of white that sparkled like diamonds in the bright light. Finn strapped on snowshoes and began clearing paths to the barn and the woodshed, and Clara watched from the window, admiring the easy strength with which he worked. That evening, Finn surprised her with a gift. He had been working on it in the barn, he explained, where she could not see. It was a sewing table, built from smooth pine, with a drawer for storing supplies and adjustable height so she could work comfortably. "Finn, it is beautiful," Clara breathed, running her hands over the polished wood. "When did you have time to make this?" "I have been working on it for weeks, whenever I had a spare moment. I wanted you to have something that was truly yours, made specifically for you and your work." Clara threw her arms around his neck and kissed him soundly. "Thank you. It is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." As winter deepened, Clara and Finn's relationship deepened with it. They were affectionate and easy with each other, stealing kisses in the kitchen, holding hands by the fire, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. But Finn never pushed for more than Clara was ready to give, and she loved him even more for his patience. In early December, Finn made a trip down to Kingston for supplies. He was gone for 2 days, and Clara was surprised by how much she missed him. The cabin felt empty without his presence, and she found herself constantly listening for his return. When he finally came back, his arms laden with packages, Clara ran out to meet him. "I missed you," she said, not caring how desperate it sounded. Finn dropped his packages and pulled her into a fierce hug, lifting her feet off the ground. "I missed you too. 2 days felt like 2 weeks. He set her down and cupped her face in his hands. "Clara, I have something to ask you." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I spoke to the minister in Kingston. He would be willing to come up here after Christmas, brave the snow to perform a wedding ceremony. If you are willing, if you think you are ready, I would like to marry you. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are it for me, Clara. You are my home." Clara felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Finn, I will marry you." Finn whooped with happiness and spun her around, then kissed her deeply. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I got this in Kingston. I hope you like it." Inside the box was a simple gold ring with a small ruby set in the center. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful. "It is perfect," Clara said as Finn slipped it onto her finger. "Absolutely perfect." They were married on a cold, clear day in January of 1877. The minister came up with his wife, and Finn's neighbors, Henry and his family, made the journey as well. Clara wore a new dress she had made herself, deep blue with delicate white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Finn wore new trousers and a shirt that Clara had sewn for him, and he had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Finn kissed Clara with such tenderness that Henry's wife wiped away tears. After the ceremony, they had a celebration with venison roast and potatoes, and a cake that Henry's wife had baked. The cabin was full of warmth and laughter, and Clara felt overwhelmed with happiness. Just a few months ago, she had been alone in that cramped room in Kingston, believing that survival was all she could hope for. Now she had a husband who loved her, friends who celebrated with her, and a home that gave her space to breathe. That night after their guests had left, Finn carried Clara over the threshold of her room, which was now their room. "Are you happy?" he asked, setting her down gently. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Clara said honestly. "Finn, you changed my life. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Finn said, pulling her close. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you came here. This cabin was just a place to live, but with you, it is a home." They made love for the first time that night, gentle and sweet, learning each other's bodies with tender care. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Clara's head resting on Finn's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Clara whispered. "I love you too," Finn said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Forever." The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Clara and Finn settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked together, cooked together, laughed together. Finn taught Clara how to snowshoe and how to identify animal tracks. Clara taught Finn how to do delicate embroidery work, and he surprised her by having a real talent for it. In February, a traveling merchant made his way up to the cabin with Finn's order. He had purchased a sewing machine, a beautiful Singer model that must have cost a fortune. Clara cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by his generosity. "You deserve the best tools for your craft," Finn said simply. "Besides, now you can take on bigger projects and we can save up for other things." "What other things?" Clara asked. Finn grinned. "Well, I was thinking maybe we could add on to the cabin, build a proper sewing room for you with big windows for natural light, and maybe, eventually, a nursery." Clara's breath caught. "A nursery, if you want children," Finn said, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know we have not talked about it, but I always imagined having a family. But if you do not want that, if you are happy with just us, then that is fine too." Clara kissed him. "I want children. I want a family with you. I want to fill this house with love and laughter." "Then that is what we will do," Finn promised. Spring came to the mountains in a rush of green and wildflowers. True to Finn's description, the meadow filled with blooms in every color imaginable. Clara spent hours sitting outside with her sewing, breathing in the sweet air and watching hummingbirds flit from flower to flower. In April, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Finn over breakfast one morning, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He jumped up from his chair, picked her up, and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Clara confirmed, smiling at his excitement. "In late October or early November, I think." Finn immediately became even more protective than before. He insisted that Clara not lift anything heavy or work too long without resting. He constantly worried about her comfort and health. It was almost overbearing, but Clara found it endearing. After years of being invisible, having someone care this much about her well-being felt like a gift. Throughout the spring and summer, Finn worked on the additions to the cabin. With Henry's help, he built a spacious sewing room with large windows that flooded the space with natural light. Clara set up her new sewing machine and organized all her supplies, and the room quickly became her favorite place in the house. Finn also built a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a sturdy cradle from smooth oak. Clara sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her heart swelling with anticipation each time she imagined holding her baby. In July, a woman from Kingston came up to the cabin looking for Clara. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, had told her that the seamstress who used to live in town was now living in the mountains. "I am sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but I heard you do beautiful work, and I need a wedding dress for my daughter. I am willing to pay well." Clara invited the woman in and showed her some samples of her work. They discussed designs and measurements, and Clara agreed to make the dress. After the woman left, Finn looked at Clara with pride. "You are going to have more customers, you know. Word will spread. You are too talented for people not to notice." He was right. Over the next several months, more women made the journey up to the cabin, seeking out Clara's skills. She had to turn some away, not wanting to take on too much while pregnant, but she took on enough projects to keep busy and to bring in extra income. "I could set up a real business," Clara mused one evening. "Take on apprentices, maybe, teach other women to sew." "You could," Finn agreed. "We have the space now, and you have the skill and the patience to be a good teacher." In October, as the leaves turned gold and red and the air grew crisp, Clara went into labor. Finn rode through the night to fetch the midwife from the nearest town, and by dawn, Clara was holding their son. "He is perfect," Finn whispered, his eyes wet with tears as he looked down at the tiny baby in Clara's arms. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel after Finn's father. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a colicky baby, crying often and sleeping little. But Clara and Finn tackled parenthood as a team, taking turns walking with him at night, supporting each other through the difficult moments, celebrating together when Samuel finally slept for more than 2 hours straight. "I did not know I could be this tired and this happy at the same time," Clara said one night, rocking Samuel while Finn made tea. "That is parenthood, I think," Finn said with a smile, "but I would not trade it for anything." As Samuel grew, the cabin filled with the sounds of his laughter and his curiosity. He was a happy baby, fascinated by everything around him. Finn carved him toys and Clara sewed him clothes, and they both marveled at how much their lives had changed. On a warm spring day in 1878, Clara sat on the porch with her sewing while Finn played with Samuel in the meadow. The baby was almost 6 months old now, sitting up on his own and grabbing at the wildflowers with chubby hands. Finn lay on his back in the grass, lifting Samuel above him and making the baby shriek with laughter. Clara watched them and felt her heart swell with love so strong it almost hurt. 2 years ago, she had been alone in that cramped room in Kingston, believing that survival was all she deserved. Now she had a husband who cherished her, a son who brought her joy, a home with space to breathe, and a future full of possibilities. Finn looked over and caught her watching. He smiled, that beautiful smile that she had fallen in love with, and mouthed, "I love you." Clara smiled back, her hands resting on her sewing. "I love you too," she called out. She thought about the girl she had been, running from Boston with nothing but a sewing kit and fear. She thought about the woman she had become in Kingston, bent over her table in that tiny room, believing that was all she would ever have. And she thought about who she was now, a wife and mother and businesswoman, living in a cabin in the mountains with a man who saw her and valued her and loved her completely, space to breathe. That was what Finn had given her, but it was more than that. He had given her room to grow, to dream, to become who she was always meant to be. And in return, she had given him companionship and love and a family to share his mountain home with. As the sun climbed higher and the meadow filled with the drone of bees and the scent of wildflowers, Clara returned to her sewing with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. This was happiness. This was home. This was love. The years flowed by like the stream that ran past their cabin, steady and clear. By 1880, Samuel was a sturdy toddler with his father's adventurous spirit, constantly climbing on everything and exploring every corner of the property. Clara was pregnant again, and this time she felt less anxious, more confident in her ability to handle whatever came. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born in March during a late snowstorm. Unlike her brother, she was a calm baby, watching the world with serious eyes and rarely crying. Finn was impossibly gentle with her, this huge mountain man cradling the tiny infant as if she were made of spun glass. "2 children," he said wonderingly one night as they sat by the fire, Elizabeth asleep in Clara's arms and Samuel curled up on Finn's lap. "We have 2 children, Clara. A family." "A beautiful family," Clara agreed softly. Clara's sewing business continued to grow. She now had 3 young women from nearby homesteads who came once a week to learn from her. The sewing room bustled with activity, and Clara loved passing on the skills her mother had taught her. It felt like a way of honoring her past while building her future. In the summer of 1881, a letter arrived from Boston. Clara's mother had somehow tracked her down, probably through a chain of inquiries that led to Kingston and then to the mountain cabin. The letter was tentative, apologetic, explaining that Clara's father had died the previous year and that her mother wanted to reconnect. Clara read the letter aloud to Finn, her voice shaking slightly. "I do not know how I feel about this," she admitted. "Part of me wants to write back to rebuild that relationship, but part of me is still so angry at them for trying to control my life." Finn pulled her into his arms. "Whatever you decide, I will support you. But remember, you do not owe them anything. You built this life yourself. You made the hard choices. If you want to let them back in, do it because you want to, not because you feel obligated." After much thought, Clara did write back. Her letter was careful, explaining her life and her family, but making it clear that she had no intention of returning to Boston or living according to anyone's expectations but her own. Her mother's response was warm and respectful, and over the following years, they maintained a cordial correspondence. Clara never regretted reaching out, but she also never forgot that her real family was here, in this cabin, with the man who had given her space to breathe. By 1883, Samuel was 6 and Elizabeth was 3, and Clara was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and she found herself exhausted much of the time. Finn took over more of the household duties, cooking and cleaning and caring for the children while Clara rested. "I am sorry I am not more help," Clara said one afternoon, frustrated with her own body's limitations. "You are growing our child," Finn said firmly. "That is the most important work there is. Let me take care of everything else." Their second son, Matthew, was born in December during a blizzard that rivaled the one from Clara's first winter in the cabin. The birth was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, the midwife worried that Clara might not survive. But Clara was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and she fought through. When she finally held Matthew, she looked up at Finn with exhausted triumph. "3 children," she said hoarsely. "We have 3 children." Finn kissed her forehead, tears running down his face. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. I love you so much, Clara." As the children grew, the cabin seemed to shrink. Finn began planning another addition, this time building separate bedrooms for the children. He also built a larger barn and purchased more animals. The homestead was thriving, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. Clara watched her children play in the meadow where she had first kissed their father, and she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had built. Samuel was growing into a thoughtful, curious boy who loved to read and explore. Elizabeth was artistic and gentle, spending hours drawing pictures and helping Clara with her sewing. Matthew was still a baby, but already he showed signs of his father's fearlessness, crawling everywhere and afraid of nothing. One evening in the spring of 1885, after the children were in bed, Clara and Finn sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Clara was 43 now, Finn was 45, and they had been married for 8 years. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in that room in Kingston?" Finn asked quietly. Clara considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have survived. I am good at surviving, but I would not have lived. Not really. I would have just existed day after day until I was old and gray and full of regrets." "I think about it too," Finn admitted. "About what my life would have been like if I had never walked into that cramped room and seen you there. I think I would have stayed lonely. This cabin would have just been a place to sleep between trips to check my traps. But you made it a home, Clara. You and our children, you made everything mean something." Clara took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hands were still scarred and calloused, still enormously strong, but they held hers with such gentleness. "We saved each other," she said softly. "You gave me space to breathe, and I gave you someone to breathe for." Finn lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every choice, every challenge, as long as it led me here to this porch with you beside me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, millions of them in the clear mountain sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept safely. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and strong, and between them, love flowed as steady and sure as the stream that ran past their home. Clara thought about the seamstress who had lived in one room, who had believed that a cramped space and endless work was all she deserved. She thought about the mountain man who had seen her desperation and offered her a chance. And she thought about how sometimes the best love stories are not about passion or drama, but about one person giving another person room to grow, and both of them choosing each day to build something beautiful together. As they finally stood to go inside, Finn pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her, soft and sweet. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for coming to this mountain, for building this life with me, for everything." Clara smiled and kissed him back. "Thank you for giving me space to breathe." They walked inside together, hand in hand, closing the door on another perfect day in the life they had built. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead, and the stream sang its endless song. And inside the cabin that had grown from one man's lonely refuge into a home filled with love and laughter, Clara and Finn Fletcher settled into bed together, wrapped in each other's arms, exactly where they were meant to be. The years continued to pass, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. By 1890, Samuel was 13 and talking about eventually going to school in the city to become a teacher. Elizabeth was 10, and she had inherited both her mother's talent for sewing and her father's love of the mountains. She could track animals as well as Finn and create beautiful embroidered pieces that customers specifically requested. Matthew was 7, wild and fearless, constantly bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Clara's sewing business had evolved into something she had never imagined. She now employed 5 women, teaching them not just how to sew but how to run their own businesses. Several of her students had gone on to open their own shops in nearby towns, and Clara felt immense pride in their success. She had created something that helped other women gain independence, just as she had gained hers. Finn had expanded their homestead as well. In addition to the original trapping, he now raised horses that he sold to ranchers throughout Nevada. He had a reputation for breeding strong, intelligent animals, and people came from far and wide to purchase from him. The money was good, and it allowed them to save for their children's futures. One afternoon in late summer, Clara was teaching a sewing class when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She looked out the window to see a well-dressed woman dismounting, followed by several servants. Clara recognized her immediately. Mrs. Hartford, the mayor's wife from Kingston, who had shortchanged her all those years ago on the wedding dress. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and went outside. Mrs. Hartford looked around the property with barely concealed surprise. The cabin had grown into a substantial house now, with multiple additions and fresh paint. The barn was large and well-maintained. Gardens flourished on all sides. It was clearly the home of a prosperous, successful family. "Mrs. Hartford," Clara said coolly, "what brings you all the way out here?" The older woman had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Miss Emerson, or I suppose it is Mrs. Fletcher now, I heard that you have built quite a successful sewing business up here." "I have," Clara confirmed, not offering any additional information. I was hoping you might take on a commission. My youngest daughter is getting married, and I have heard that your work is the finest in Nevada." Clara looked at this woman who had treated her so poorly, who had accused her of substandard work and cheated her out of money she had rightfully earned. She thought about the girl she had been then, too afraid of losing business to stand up for herself. "I am afraid I am not taking on any new commissions at this time," Clara said pleasantly. "My schedule is completely full. However, I can recommend several excellent seamstresses. My former students have opened shops in Carson City and Reno. I am sure one of them would be happy to help you." Mrs. Hartford's face flushed. "Surely you can make room for one more customer. I am willing to pay very well." "I am sure you are," Clara said, "but as I said, I am not available. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a class to teach." She turned and walked back into her sewing room where her students were waiting. Through the window, Clara watched Mrs. Hartford stand there for a moment, clearly shocked at being dismissed so easily, before finally climbing back on her horse and riding away. Finn came in a few minutes later, having witnessed the encounter from the barn. "I am proud of you," he said, pulling Clara into a hug. "For what?" "For knowing your worth, for not letting her treat you poorly again." He kissed the top of her head. "The Clara I met 10 years ago would have taken that job, no matter how much she did not want to." "The Clara you met 10 years ago did not know how to say no," Clara said. "She did not know she was allowed to. You taught me that, Finn. You taught me that I deserve respect." As the 1890s progressed, Clara and Finn watched their children grow into remarkable young adults. Samuel went off to college in San Francisco, writing long letters home about his studies and his dreams of opening a school in rural Nevada, where children who lived on remote homesteads could get a quality education. Elizabeth, at 15, was already taking on major sewing commissions and talking about expanding the business. Matthew, at 12, spent every free moment in the barn with his father, learning everything Finn could teach him about horses and mountain life. On their 15th wedding anniversary in January 1892, Finn surprised Clara with a trip. They left the children in the care of Henry's family and rode south for several days, eventually reaching a hot spring that Finn had discovered years earlier. "I wanted to bring you somewhere special," Finn explained as they soaked in the warm, mineral-rich water under the stars. "Just the two of us, away from the children and the business and everything else. I wanted to remind you that you are still the most important person in my world." Clara leaned back against him, feeling his strong arms wrap around her. "I never forget that. You show me every day how much you love me." "Good," Finn said, kissing her neck, "because I plan to keep showing you for the rest of our lives." They stayed at the hot spring for 3 days, sleeping under the stars, talking for hours about everything and nothing, making love with the same passion they had felt as newlyweds. It was a reminder that underneath the roles of parents and business owners and pillars of their small mountain community, they were still Finn and Clara, still the mountain man and the seamstress who had fallen in love in a cabin during a snowstorm. By 1895, Clara was 43 and Finn was 45. Samuel had returned from college and was in the process of building his school in a valley about 30 miles south. Elizabeth was running the sewing business alongside Clara, and her skill had surpassed even her mother's. Matthew, at 16, was as comfortable on a horse as his father and was already building his own reputation as a horse trainer. One evening, sitting on the porch they had sat on countless times before, Clara turned to Finn and said, "We did it." "Did what?" "Built a life. A real life, full of love and purpose and meaning. We took 2 scared, lonely people and turned them into this." She gestured around at the home they had built, the family they had raised, the business they had grown. Finn pulled her close, and Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You know what I think about sometimes," he said quietly. "I think about that day I walked into your room above the general store. I almost didn't go. I almost just took my torn coat to someone else. But something made me climb those stairs, and when I saw you in that cramped little space surrounded by all that fabric, I knew you were going to change my life." "You saved me," Clara said softly. "No," Finn corrected gently. "We saved each other. You think I gave you space to breathe, but Clara, you gave me a reason to breathe. Before you, I was just existing, just going through the motions. You made everything matter. You made me want to be better, do more, build something lasting." Clara turned and kissed him, pouring 15 years of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Finn Fletcher," she said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Clara Fletcher," he replied. More than words can say. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Boston to Kingston to this mountain cabin. From a cramped room where she could barely turn around to a sprawling home with space for her family and her dreams. From a girl who thought survival was enough to a woman who knew she deserved joy. And through it all, there had been Finn. Strong, gentle Finn, who had seen past her walls and her pride to the lonely woman underneath. Who had offered her not just a job but a home. Who had given her not just space but love. Who had built a life with her based on respect and partnership and deep, abiding affection. Inside the house, Clara could hear her children laughing, could smell dinner cooking, could feel the warmth that came from being surrounded by family. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago when she fled Boston. Not independence, though she had that. Not financial security, though she had that too. But this feeling of being cherished, of being home. Finn squeezed her hand and Clara squeezed back. No words were necessary. They had spent 15 years learning each other's silent language, understanding each other's needs and dreams without having to speak them aloud. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara and Finn Fletcher sat together on their porch, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync, grateful for every moment that had led them to this perfect, peaceful evening. The seamstress had found her home, and the mountain man had found his heart, and together they had built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Their children would tell their children about the love story of Finn and Clara Fletcher. About how they met when she was living in one room above a general store, barely surviving. About how he offered her a job and a home and, eventually, his heart. About how they built a life together in the mountains, raising a family and creating businesses, and proving that sometimes the best adventures come from the simplest acts of kindness. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines, and the stream sang its eternal song, people swore they could still feel the love that had been built in that cabin. The love between a mountain man and a seamstress. The love that had started with space to breathe and had grown into something vast and endless and true.